Are you looking for an adventurous summer job? Well, how about hunting invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades? The South Florida Water Management District is paying $8.10 an hour to hunt the slithering creatures.
Imagine checking a wildlife camera expecting to find a giant snake, and instead discovering something that makes experienced scientists abandon everything and rush back to the lab the very same night. Deep inside Florida's Big Cypress National Preserve, dozens of hidden cameras had been quietly watching the wilderness for weeks. Their mission was simple: track the spread of the invasive Burmese python, map its movements, and measure the damage being done to one of America's most fragile ecosystems. Nothing more. When biologist Dr. Michael Kirkland finally collected one of those cameras and reviewed the footage, everything changed. The video didn't show the animal his team had spent months searching for. It didn't capture an alligator. It didn't even reveal another invasive species. Instead, it recorded something so unexpected, so scientifically significant, that Kirkland immediately called every member of his research team and ordered them to return to the field station that very night. What appeared on that memory card challenged decades of assumptions about the Everglades. It forced researchers to rethink how the invasion was unfolding and hinted that nature might be fighting back in a way no one had predicted. But to understand why those few seconds of footage shocked experts, we first have to go back to where this story really began. How did the Burmese python become the ruler of the Everglades? How did one of the world's most beautiful wetlands turn into a silent battlefield? And what exactly did that hidden camera capture that left scientists speechless? Stay with us until the very end, because the final footage reveals a discovery that completely changed what experts thought they knew about Florida's deadliest invasive predator. And before we uncover the incredible truth, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription helps us bring you more fascinating documentaries, real mysteries, and astonishing discoveries from around the world. Now, let's uncover the shocking footage that changed everything. On August 24, 1992, Hurricane Andrew slammed into southern Florida with catastrophic force. Winds exceeded 165 miles per hour. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. 65 people lost their lives, and the storm left behind more than $27 billion in damage. Amid the widespread destruction, one event attracted little attention at the time, but it would reshape the Everglades for decades to come. Just south of Miami, a reptile breeding facility housing numerous Burmese pythons was devastated by the hurricane. As buildings collapsed and floodwaters surged through the property, the enclosures gave way. An unknown number of massive snakes escaped into the surrounding wetlands and vanished without a trace. In the chaos following a Category 5 hurricane, no one was focused on tracking escaped reptiles. Rescue operations, damaged infrastructure, and displaced families demanded immediate attention. The missing snakes simply disappeared into the flooded wilderness. However, Hurricane Andrew wasn't the only reason Burmese pythons established themselves in South Florida. It merely accelerated a problem that had already been developing for years. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Burmese pythons became highly sought-after exotic pets. They were sold as tiny hatchlings, small enough to fit comfortably in the palm of your hand. But those harmless-looking babies didn't stay small for long. Within only a few years, many had grown beyond 12 feet in length, becoming far too large for ordinary homes or aquariums. Unable or unwilling to care for them, countless owners made what they believed was a compassionate decision. They drove to the edge of the Everglades, opened a container, and released their pet into the wild. They thought they were giving the animal its freedom. Instead, they were introducing one of the world's most efficient predators into an ecosystem completely unprepared for its arrival. From the python's perspective, the Everglades offered almost everything it could possibly need. Stretching across more than 1.5 million acres of subtropical wetlands, the region provides constant warmth, high humidity, endless waterways, and an extraordinary abundance of prey. For a large ambush constrictor, it was almost the perfect environment to thrive. The native wildlife had evolved over thousands of years alongside predators such as alligators, bobcats, and Florida panthers. Their instincts were finely tuned to recognize those familiar threats, but the Burmese python was something entirely different. No raccoon, rabbit, opossum, or marsh bird had evolved to detect a predator capable of growing over 15 feet long, sensing body heat in complete darkness, remaining perfectly motionless beneath only a few inches of water, and launching an attack with astonishing speed. Many animals unknowingly walked within striking distance, unable to recognize the danger hidden before them, much like a person casually stepping past what appears to be nothing more than an old garden hose. Dr. Frank Mazzotti, a wildlife ecologist at the University of Florida and one of the pioneers leading research into Florida's python invasion, summed up the situation with a comparison that became unforgettable among conservation scientists. Releasing Burmese pythons into the Everglades, he explained, was like releasing wolves into a petting zoo. The snakes didn't simply adapt to their new surroundings, they flourished. Female Burmese pythons are exceptionally productive breeders, typically laying between 50 and 100 eggs in a single clutch. Even more remarkable, they remain wrapped around the eggs throughout incubation, repeatedly contracting their muscles to generate heat and keep the developing embryos warmer than the surrounding environment. It's a behavior far more commonly associated with birds than reptiles. At the same time, South Florida had virtually no natural predators capable of controlling either adult pythons or their nests. As a result, the population exploded. Even conservative estimates now suggest around 100,000 Burmese pythons inhabit South Florida. Some research teams studying the western Everglades believe the real figure could approach 300,000. Just 2 decades earlier, the ecosystem had contained none. The environmental consequences soon became impossible to ignore. In 2012, Dr. Mazzotti and fellow researchers published a landmark study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, documenting dramatic declines in mammal populations throughout areas where pythons had become established. The results were staggering. Raccoon numbers had fallen by 99.3%. Opossums declined by 98.9%. Bobcats dropped by 87%. Species that had once been common throughout the Everglades had, in many locations, almost disappeared altogether. Yet the statistics tell only part of the story. Perhaps the most disturbing evidence isn't found in scientific charts. It's found in the silence. Over the years, Dr. Mazzotti has spoken about returning to roads he had traveled since the 1980s. Back then, driving after sunset meant constantly slowing down as raccoons, rabbits, deer, and other wildlife crossed the road every few hundred feet. Today, those same roads can stretch for miles without a single animal appearing. No glowing eyes reflecting in the headlights. No movement along the roadside. Only endless sawgrass, empty pavement, and the steady sound of the engine cutting through a silence that shouldn't exist in one of North America's richest wetlands. He recalls stopping at one particular location where decades earlier he had documented 53 different mammals during just a 2-hour observation session. When he returned years later, he stepped out of his vehicle, waited, and listened. There was nothing. That silence represents far more than disappearing wildlife. It signals a profound transformation of one of the world's most unique ecosystems, one whose effects continue to spread far beyond the Everglades themselves. The Everglades is far more than a vast stretch of wetlands. It serves as a natural shield against flooding, filters water for millions of residents, and replenishes the underground aquifers that supply drinking water to one of America's fastest-growing urban regions. Scientists estimate that this remarkable ecosystem contributes more than $31 billion to the economy every year. The small mammals disappearing from the Everglades weren't insignificant pieces of the ecosystem. They were essential building blocks of an intricate food web. They supported birds, reptiles, and countless other species while helping maintain the vegetation responsible for filtering and regulating water across the entire landscape. By wiping out these animals, Burmese pythons weren't simply hunting prey. They were slowly taking apart the entire ecological system. Hunting invisible predators. Florida's first large-scale response came through the Florida Python Challenge, a public hunting competition organized by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. During the 2024 event, participants removed 195 Burmese pythons over 10 days. At first glance, that number sounds impressive, but if the state's python population truly approaches 300,000, those removals accounted for just 0.065% of the total population. In practical terms, a single successful breeding group could replace every snake removed during the challenge. It wasn't a solution. It barely registered against the scale of the invasion. Recognizing this, Florida shifted from public competitions to professional removal programs. Experienced contract hunters were assigned permanent sectors throughout the Everglades under a partnership between the South Florida Water Management District and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. One of the most recognized members of the program is Donna Khalil, the first female contractor hired to hunt Burmese pythons full-time. She often describes the work with one unforgettable comparison. Searching for pythons in the Everglades, she says, feels like hunting ghosts. For hours, a headlamp sweeps across canal banks and endless saw grass without revealing a single snake. Nothing appears. Then, just beyond the edge of the light, a faint shape breaks the pattern of the vegetation. As your eyes adjust, what looked like an old tree root suddenly becomes a massive coiled python, completely motionless until the instant it moves. The job is as physically exhausting as it is mentally draining. Khalil has spoken about spending entire nights wading through waist-deep swamp water, sometimes for 6 or 7 hours without a break, while searching in near-total darkness. She has also described wrestling enormous female pythons, weighing close to 200 pounds, dragging them from dense marsh vegetation where no machinery or additional help can reach. Yet the hardest part isn't removing the snake. It's knowing another one is almost certainly hiding nearby. Since the contractor program began in 2017, professional hunters have removed more than 23,000 Burmese pythons from Florida. That sounds like a huge success, but against an estimated population of hundreds of thousands, it still represents less than 5% of the total. Every removal is quickly offset by new hatchlings entering the ecosystem. Technology couldn't save the Everglades. Researchers have experimented with nearly every technological solution imaginable: thermal imaging drones, highly effective for locating warm-blooded animals, proved largely useless because pythons are cold-blooded and quickly match the temperature of the surrounding landscape. Robotic prey designed to lure snakes also failed. Burmese pythons don't actively chase food. They simply wait perfectly still until real prey unknowingly wanders within striking distance. One technique, however, has delivered meaningful results. It's known as the Judas snake program. Researchers surgically implant a GPS transmitter into an adult male python before releasing him back into the wild. During breeding season, the tagged male naturally seeks out females. Scientists simply follow his movements to hidden breeding sites containing multiple reproductive snakes. The technique was pioneered by Ian Bartoszek of the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Using this strategy, his team has located and removed some of the largest breeding females ever documented, including snakes weighing well over 200 pounds. Among every method currently available, the Judas program consistently produces the highest number of successful removals. Even so, it still isn't enough. The Everglades is simply too vast for existing teams to monitor effectively. The snakes are changing their behavior. Veteran hunters have started noticing something even more concerning. According to Florida contractor Mike Kimmel, better known as the Python Cowboy, the snakes appear to be adapting. As hunting pressure increases, more pythons are abandoning accessible waterways and retreating deeper into remote sawgrass marshes and isolated cypress hammocks, places that humans rarely enter and where locating them becomes dramatically more difficult. The breeding populations are gradually concentrating in areas beyond the reach of routine patrols. In other words, the snakes may be adapting faster than people can remove them. The hidden threat nobody expected. As alarming as the python invasion had become, an even more disturbing discovery was quietly unfolding. This time, the danger wasn't the snakes themselves. It was something they had unknowingly brought with them. Dr. Terence Farrell, a herpetologist at Stetson University, was conducting routine health examinations on captured snakes when he noticed a disturbing pattern, not in the invasive pythons, but among Florida's native snake species: garter snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, eastern diamondbacks. Many were arriving severely underweight, weak, struggling to breathe, and unable to close their mouths properly. When Farrell's team performed detailed examinations, they discovered the same horrifying condition again and again. The lungs of these native snakes were packed with dozens of tiny, pale, translucent parasites. The organisms were alive. They were moving. They filled the respiratory passages so densely that many snakes slowly suffocated. In living animals, some of the parasites could even be seen emerging from mouths too weak to close. Scientists eventually identified the organism as Raelietiella orientalis, commonly known as the snake lungworm. The parasite originated in Southeast Asia, and it had arrived in Florida alongside the Burmese python. For millions of years, pythons and this parasite evolved together. In their native environment, the snake's immune systems keep the parasite under control, allowing them to survive while continuing to spread it to other hosts. The pythons become carriers. They transport the parasite, but they rarely suffer serious illness from it. Florida's native snakes had no such evolutionary advantage. They had never encountered this parasite before. Their immune systems had no natural defense against it. Dr. Farrell compared the situation to the first encounters between isolated indigenous populations and European explorers carrying diseases the local people had never been exposed to. The result was devastating, and it revealed that the python invasion wasn't just introducing a new predator into the Everglades, it was introducing an entirely new disease, one capable of silently spreading through native wildlife, with consequences scientists are only beginning to understand. Over countless generations, one species had slowly evolved alongside the parasite and developed a degree of natural resistance. The other had never encountered it before. The consequences for Florida's native snakes have been devastating. What makes the outbreak especially dangerous is the way the parasite spreads. Breaking its transmission cycle isn't as simple as removing one infected species, because the entire wetland food chain has become part of the process. An infected Burmese python releases waste containing microscopic lungworm larvae. Cockroaches, feeding on that waste, unknowingly ingest the parasites. Frogs then eat the infected insects. Native snakes feed on the frogs. Every step in that sequence is completely natural. That's how the Everglades ecosystem has always functioned. The only difference now is that an ordinary meal can become a fatal infection. Every frog has the potential to carry parasites, and every snake that eats it unknowingly risks becoming the next victim. Dr. Melissa Miller, a parasitologist at the University of Florida who has spent years studying the outbreak, mapped just how far the parasite had spread. Her findings were alarming. At least 18 native snake species have already been confirmed infected, and the parasite is no longer confined to South Florida. It has expanded more than 300 miles north, reaching as far as Jacksonville. Then came the discovery that fundamentally changed scientists' understanding of the crisis. The lungworm no longer depends on Burmese pythons to survive. It has successfully completed what's known as a host shift. Instead of relying on the invasive snakes, the parasite has established a completely self-sustaining life cycle within Florida's native wildlife. Cockroaches, frogs, and native snakes now keep the parasite circulating through the ecosystem entirely on their own. Even if every Burmese python vanished tomorrow, the parasite would remain. It has become an independent invader. Florida is no longer battling just one ecological disaster. It is confronting two at the same time. From above, Burmese pythons continue wiping out mammals across the food web. From below, the lungworm is silently attacking native reptiles. It's as if the Everglades is being dismantled from both the roof and the foundation simultaneously. A glimmer of hope. Hidden within years of field data, researchers uncovered one remarkable exception. The Florida cottonmouth, Agistrodon cananti, appears to possess an extraordinary resistance to the lungworm. When Dr. Terence Farrell's team examined cottonmouths collected from heavily infected regions, they found surprisingly few parasites. The infection levels were so low that they posed almost no measurable threat to the species. Based on everything scientists understood about the outbreak, cottonmouths should have been just as vulnerable as other native snakes. Instead, they appeared almost unaffected. Researchers still don't know why. Somewhere within the cottonmouth's immune system may lie a biological defense that could one day help protect many of Florida's other native snake species. For now, however, that mystery remains unsolved. The emperor returns. Then came an announcement that shocked the public. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, working alongside conservation organizations, revealed plans to release hundreds of large snakes into northern Florida. Many residents reacted immediately with anger. Why would officials deliberately release more snakes during an invasive snake crisis? The answer was simple. These weren't Burmese pythons. They were eastern indigo snakes. Far from being invasive, the eastern indigo is one of the southeast's most important native predators. Once widespread across Florida and Georgia, the species had nearly vanished after decades of habitat destruction, disappearing from much of its historical range for more than half a century. Known scientifically as Drymarchon cooperi, the eastern indigo is the longest native snake in North America. Its glossy black scales shimmer with brilliant blue and green iridescence under sunlight. Researchers who encounter one in the wild rarely describe it as intimidating. Instead, they almost always use the same word, beautiful. But its true importance has nothing to do with its appearance. It comes from what it hunts. Eastern indigo snakes specialize in eating other snakes. They're known as ophiophagus predators. Even more remarkable, they are naturally immune to the venom of North America's pit vipers. Cottonmouths, copperheads, and rattlesnakes are all potential prey. Rather than relying on venom, the indigo overpowers its victims, using sheer strength before swallowing them whole. Dr. Dirk Stevenson of the Oriane Society, who has spent more than 20 years leading eastern indigo restoration efforts, refers to the species as the emperor of the forest floor. In a healthy southeastern forest, very few animals challenge a fully grown indigo. Adults commonly exceed 8 feet in length, while exceptional individuals have measured over 9 feet. Yet despite its dominance, the species had disappeared from much of northern Florida. The reason wasn't predators, it was habitat loss. Eastern indigo snakes rely heavily on gopher tortoise burrows, especially during winter, when underground shelters provide protection from cold temperatures. Recognizing this, the Oriane Society launched a long-term captive breeding program in the early 2000s, but restoring the indigo required much more than breeding snakes. Scientists first had to rebuild an entire ecosystem. Longleaf pine forests were restored, native grasses were replanted. Controlled burns were reintroduced to recreate the natural fire cycle. Gopher tortoise populations were strengthened so new burrow systems could once again support wildlife. Only after years of habitat restoration were captive-bred eastern indigos finally released into the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve in Florida's Panhandle. Then, in late 2023, a trail camera recorded something extraordinary. Positioned beside a gopher tortoise burrow, the camera captured 2 tiny eastern indigo hatchlings emerging into the world. These weren't released animals. They had been conceived in the wild. They had hatched naturally, and they had survived entirely without human assistance. Barely longer than pencils, the young snakes moved confidently across the forest floor as if they had always belonged there. For the first time in over 50 years, eastern indigo snakes were reproducing naturally in northern Florida once again. The emperor hadn't simply returned. Its kingdom was beginning to grow again. The Everglades fights back. When Dr. Michael Kirkland reviewed the footage from one of his remote trail cameras, he expected another routine recording of Burmese pythons moving through the swamp. Instead, he witnessed something almost no researcher had ever seen. Deep inside the Big Cypress National Preserve, a 25-pound bobcat dragged the lifeless body of a 50-pound Burmese python across the forest floor. The snake's head had already been removed, a sign that the bobcat had targeted its most vulnerable point before claiming its prize. For nearly 3 decades, Burmese pythons had spread across the Everglades with almost no natural resistance. They had become one of North America's most successful invasive predators, devastating native wildlife and transforming once thriving wetlands into landscapes of eerie silence. But this footage suggested something remarkable. The ecosystem was beginning to respond. Researchers have now documented alligators, bobcats, and even the endangered Florida panther attacking pythons. Native predators appear to be learning that these giant snakes are no longer just a threat, they're prey. At the same time, conservationists are restoring the eastern indigo snake, a powerful native predator that may one day help control young pythons before they ever reach breeding age. While no one knows if it can stop the invasion, its return offers something the Everglades hasn't had in decades: hope. The fight, however, is far from over. The python population continues to grow, and the invasive lungworm continues spreading through Florida's native snake community. Even if every Burmese python disappeared tomorrow, the parasite would remain. Still, nature is beginning to answer back. Every predator that learns to hunt a python, every juvenile python that never reaches adulthood, every eastern indigo hatchling born in the wild, brings the Everglades one step closer to recovery. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more true wildlife mysteries and incredible discoveries like this, take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We're working toward our 1,000 subscriber milestone, and your support helps us create more high-quality documentaries every week. No one knows how this battle will end, but every time Dr. Michael Kirkland watches those final 20 seconds of footage, a lone bobcat dragging a defeated python through the swamp, he sees something that had been missing for decades. Not victory, not recovery, but hope. Because for the first time in a generation, the Everglades is fighting back.